Welcome back to Catholic Messenger Conversations, our monthly podcast. Today, our guest is Father Andrew Rauenbuehler, who was ordained last month as a priest of the Diocese of Davenport. I am Barbara Arlen Fye, your host. Welcome, Father Andrew, and I apologize if I mispronounced your last name, and you better tell me if I did.
It was perfect, Barb, but thank you. It's good to be here.
You know, I'm so excited about this interview, no, it's a podcast, so I'll say not an interview. What I want to know is, tell me about your journey to the priesthood.
Yeah. Well, it was long and took a meandering path to the priesthood, in fact. Really, it begins, though, in my adolescence as a young boy, elementary school. For whatever reason, I had this idea of the priesthood, and whatever it was, I don't know, except for the fact that I come from a big Catholic family down in Muscatine. And growing up, you know, you go to Mass on Sundays, and the priest is kind of one profession that a young kid always sees. And so it was always, I suppose, in that sense, an option. If, you know, you can't be a professional athlete or something like that, the priest is a job you know people do. But I was blessed with a solid Catholic upbringing and a great home parish to come from as well. And so as a young boy, I went to Hayes Catholic School, is what it was named back then, down in Muscatine. I went there through 5th grade and had at least an inkling of an idea of a vocation to the priesthood, though, you know, you're so young, it doesn't necessarily mean that much at that point. However, it meant enough to me to play Mass with my younger brother at home. So we would wear bathrobes as our vestments and have stuffed animals as the congregation sprawled on the floor in the family living room. And we would, you know, use Ritz crackers and the like to imitate communion and all this. And so there was a real sense of the priesthood as being something that maybe God was calling me to. As I grew up, though, then, I mean, that was something that matured, and I imagine we can get into.
Well, you know, I talked to your 2nd grade teacher from Hayes at your ordination Mass, and she said she came all the way up from Florida because she wasn't going to miss this ordination Mass.
Right.
And she said that you talked about playing Mass as a kid, and she just thought that was, I think she knew at that point that there was something there. Yeah,
and you know, I think a lot of people did as well. I mean, as along the journey to finally becoming a priest, there's times in which you're kind of like you're less sure or not. But it's been interesting over the last few weeks to kind of hear those stories of people who, even when I wasn't in seminary and I was doing other things, that people always kind of hung on to this idea that I might be a priest someday.
Awesome. What signs did you sense that the priesthood might be your vocational calling? So as you were maturing a little bit, and did you feel that sense that God was saying, "Hey, Andrew, I'm calling you"?
Yeah. So growing up, I was also an altar server, and that was something I was able to do with my friends and my cousins. And so there was a certain familiarity around the altar from a young age that I think developed in me a certain closeness, not just to the parish priests who were celebrating the Mass, but just a familiarity with the Mass itself, and being up at the parish church and being around all those things. I think that closeness to the Mass, to the church building itself, kind of lent itself to be a thing that led me to find a certain peace or sense of just belonging at Mass at the parish church that I think has kind of stuck with me. Well, obviously now being a priest, but lent itself well to ongoing
did you
discernment.
say that you had cousins and friends who were also altar servers?
That's right. Yeah. So we had a really good crew back in the day, and so really, from the support of the priests we had down in Muscatine at the time, you know, it was just a great camaraderie and ways in which getting, you know, these young young guys involved at the church and being able to practice and then serve at bigger liturgies like for Christmas, midnight mass, and Easter vigil and all that, I think was honestly quite instrumental in planting some seeds.
Did you have a favorite mass to serve? Was midnight mass one of them, or?
It certainly was. However, the Easter vigil is always kind of the World Series,
Yes.
NBA finals of masses. And so that was always kind of the one with the most moving parts, and where honestly, like, if you have a good crew of altar servers, it can really make the mass more prayerful and run a lot more smoothly for the priest.
That is so
yeah.
cool. How would you describe your ordination to the priesthood on June 5th?
Yeah, well, besides it being just a long time coming, it was just really filled with a lot of joy, which I think we spoke about that day, in fact, and also a great sense of peace. It was obviously much different than my ordination last summer to the diaconate with less COVID restrictions and all, and so it really just kind of felt like a normal coming together of family, friends, the diocese, and it felt right, to put it, succinctly and simply, that it was, it was time to do this.
So tell me about those special moments. I mean, was there like a couple of special moments within the liturgy itself that were just really kind of moved you especially, or were you just sort of in a blur?
It wasn't a blur in the moment. Really, I kind of felt relaxed and able to appreciate the liturgy itself. Certainly the readings, all of which I was able to pick out myself, were meaningful for me. The reading from Jeremiah, don't say you're too young. I'll put the words in your mouth. So it's really, the Lord who's called me and will send me and give me the words I need, as I serve as a priest. From Hebrews, Christ, the priest working in imitation of Christ, who humbled himself and learned obedience from what he suffered. Just kind of hitting on those notes of the priesthood, that it's not easy, but we have Christ, the high priest, who's gone this way before us, and God willing, we can imitate him. And then the vine and the branches, no greater love is this than to lay down your life for your friends, from the gospel, John 15. Also very meaningful. So I loved that. I also really enjoyed Bishop's homily, speaking of Father Emil Capon from Kansas. Awesome. Just really kind of a good, encouraging homily, but also offering a lot to live up to as well. So it kind of struck the right balance between, getting the feelings right, but also, encouraging and challenging me.
What I appreciate about that homily, and he does this, I think, in a lot of his homilies at ordinations, is to help you remember it's not about you, right?
That's right.
It's not about me. It's about us as a faith community, as your ministry, as the work, the vocation itself, right? Isn't it?
Yeah. No, I think that's exactly right. And I would say that's another thing that I was picking up on my ordination day, first Mass day, and in the week since, is that ultimately my being ordained to the priesthood and me living out my priesthood now isn't something that was for me. It's not a thing I was doing because I thought it's cool or because it would get me ahead in life. Obviously not going to get me ahead in life in worldly terms, but even, in the eyes of God, it's really, whenever a man is ordained to the priesthood, it's a gift from God to the church, and a way in which God really is showing us how much he cares for the church. And a lot of that's dependent upon me and upon the men who are ordained to the priesthood to listen to what God is calling them to, and then to have the fortitude and perseverance to do it. But ultimately, it's about God taking care of all of us as a diocese, as parishes. And so I really was just feeling that on the day of ordination, that as much as it might seem to the outsider that this is all about Andrew today, I didn't feel that. I really felt like this was a day for all of us to rejoice for ourselves, for us as a diocese, as Catholics, because the Lord's providing,
I love that. You talked about listening. Tell me about that. What are your ways of listening? I bet you have a lot of different ways of listening.
Yeah, well, I mean, to listen ultimately means that you have to have time to listen. You have to be in a state in which you can listen, and we're constantly listening to things here and there, either to kind of the own conversation we're having in our minds, to music, to podcasts, to TV, to social media. So, I mean, we're constantly listening to things. And God can speak to us through those things, certainly, but we also have to create space in which the voice of God can enter into our lives. And so, first and foremost, if I want to be a listener to God, I have to create that space. And that space is really the time in which we can pray. And prayer is nothing more than a conversation, but we all know, like right now, a conversation is a two-way street. Right. And so it's not just me pouring out my heart or speaking to the Lord, but also letting him speak to me. So I think that's the first and most important part of listening to the voice of God. But like I mentioned, God also speaks to us through those around us, through our experiences, through our desires. And that's ultimately kind of what brought me back around to the idea of priesthood, now going on 6 years ago, heading up to St. Paul to enter seminary, was really kind of the ways in which God was speaking to me through my own desires.
That's just terrific. What have been the first few weeks of priesthood been like for you? How would you describe these first few weeks? Well, it's been what? It's been over a month. Just a little bit over a month.
Yeah, just a month and 2 days. Yeah, that's right. So a bit of a whirlwind that first week was, but a good one. So whirlwind in the best sense. Just having people come back to Muscatine, so seeing lots of family and friends, obviously celebrating Mass for the first time, and just kind of like it already been mentioned, but just a great sense of joy. But then I was able to kind of take a little bit of time to be quiet, or just to be back home with my family and friends, and before I moved up here to Davenport last week to start my ministry. But it's been great just to see, it's interesting because people obviously, the biggest adjustment has been people calling me Father.
I was going to ask you that. Is that strange? And do your family members call you Father? What about your mom and dad?
No, they don't. They call me Andrew, and I wouldn't want it any other way. My siblings call me Andrew. My niece and nephews, call me by their nicknames for me. So it's all, that's good. It's kind of a good way to ground me, keep me grounded.
What about someone like me who is quite a bit older than you calling you Father?
Right, exactly. And that's I'm not going to speculate on your age bar. Maybe, it's not that much. You make it sound like it's a huge chasm, but no. It's a lot to get used to. But it's also kind of a constant reminding myself of, who is it that I've been called to be? So causes a little bit of growing up in that sense.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. So what are you hoping to learn? Now you're at at Our Lady of Victory Parish,
that's right.
Right?
Yep.
So what are you hoping to learn there?
Yeah. Obviously there's a lot to learn. I think besides like all the administrative ins and outs and all those sort of business related tasks that parish priests have to be privy to and kind of know how to handle and manage, I think mostly I'm interested in learning about the people who are members at Our Lady of Victory, learning their stories, learning about their families, learning about the school families, to try to see not only the ways in which God is active in their lives and the ways they know and see and recognize their need to rely on the Lord, but also kind of then what's my role, to use the word father, what's my role as a spiritual father in those moments to kind of spur them along their faith journeys, to allow them to grow in the relationship with God and the church. And so I think there's a lot of different ways in which I need to learn how to do that best. Because I think that's a recognition of like, the Lord's already working up there on Division Street. He's already working in your parish. He's already working in your lives and in the lives of the priests who've been at your parish. And so I have a lot just to kind of take in from that standpoint. And I think as I grow more comfortable and get to know people more, I'll be able to kind of put those things I've learned both in seminary and then at parish assignments and hopefully add the little I can do, to
So does that shape your homily then? I mean,
Yeah.
because, I've been told that you really need to know your audience. You
Yes.
need to know your congregation
Yes.
to speak to their hearts.
That's right.
So do you see that as something that's evolving right now?
It is. So, and I was just thinking about this earlier today, in fact, because I was thinking about preaching, what to preach about this upcoming weekend. And I was just reminded of the fact that, okay, you can have a lot of great ideas, but one of the first questions you have to ask yourself is like, okay, what does the average person in the pew need to hear or take away from these readings that we have this weekend? Because otherwise, I'm just kind of talking to myself. But it's interesting because as I've been preaching this last year at the seminary to, a chapel full of priests and fellow seminarians, like I know what their life is like.
Yes.
Because it's a shared life. We're living it together. We've got the same routine essentially. And so it's really easy to know what I need to be talking about, what's going to be a key takeaway for them. And that'll come with time, as I get to know the parishioners at Our Lady of Victory or whatever parish I'm assigned at. But I think that's key.
Yes, exactly. So how would you describe your approach to ministry? In the Mass, outside the Mass, interacting with others?
Well, I think it is how I introduced myself at Our Lady of Victory last weekend or 2 weekends ago was just, well, not just this, but I mentioned that, I'm a new member of the parish. And so I think the priest, and maybe even more so parochial vicar, because, I don't have to be the big pastor, making all the final decisions, is that I am in a lot of ways also a fellow member of the parish in my own, distinct role as a priest, as a spiritual father. But it's the parish is really a microcosm for the wider church. And, you hear about the body of Christ in St. Paul's writings, and we each have our own calling and, function that we perform, our place in the body of Christ. I think if I can live out that, my priestly identity, my vocation to the priesthood in a sense of being a member of the parish, I think it not only will help me to remain humble and committed, but also I think be a rallying cry for others to also kind of take up the reins of, okay, what's my mission in the church right now? Where do I need to be lending my voice or my hands on the parish level?
Oh, I like that. That's a great approach. I'm wondering too, how do you think your experiences in the secular world, like as an EMT,
Sure.
Shape you as a priest?
Yeah, so certainly my past history working as a medic offers a lot of specific things that I think are translatable to ministry, but also kind of other jobs I've had and kind of the experience of living out in the world on my own. But just to speak briefly on the medic aspect, obviously no one ever calls 911 because they're having a good day.
Yeah.
And so you just kind of are thrust into situations that are usually dire and there's suffering involved and people crying, and just you can kind of see the heartache that comes along with our human condition.
Yeah.
And I think while the priest is also exposed to a lot of joy, the joys of life at baptisms, at weddings, and the like, the priest is also, as the prophet Isaiah explains the suffering servant, a prefigurement of Christ, a man acquainted with sorrows.
Yeah.
So Christ himself was God, but acquainted with sorrows. I think the priest is as well, and there's no getting around that fact. But I think kind of my experience of being in those situations, and frankly, a certain comfort level with that, will be helpful as a priest, but where I was limited as a medic to only be assisting people on a physical level, and you can really, you didn't have either the time or the role to enter in from a spiritual standpoint. That's where kind of the hope that we have in Christ can, through me, hopefully enter those situations of deep suffering.
Sometimes I wonder about that, though, when someone is in a dire situation like that. I think some of that spiritual comfort would be so helpful at that time, even so. I don't know how you could mesh the two, and I understand there are chaplains, but sometimes it's at that very moment,
Certainly.
And someone thinks, I don't know if I'm going to live or die here.
Certainly, yeah. So, absolutely, and obviously, hopefully, in some situations, just with timing, it doesn't always work out. But God willing, there's a chaplain around and all this. But also, it comes with, and I've seen this in some preaching that I've already done over the past years. It's every time people come to Mass, you're also preparing them for how they're living their lives out, when they're not at church. And so, even kind of those past experience, being on the streets as a medic in those situations, give me a little food for thought of how to approach this scripture passage so it can give people, upstream from a suffering that comes their way, a way of viewing it, a way of kind of uniting it to Christ, a way of finding hope, in those situations that inevitably come.
Have you had any other jobs where you thought to yourself, I have no idea what I'm getting out of this or what I'm taking away from this, but then you look back on it and you see, oh my gosh, this applies so much to where I'm at right now as a priest?
So my high school job was working at a pharmacy, and I would do a lot of delivery for the pharmacy. And so I was in and out of nursing homes all the time, getting people hooked up for oxygen tanks and hospital beds and the like. And so, there was also kind of from a young age, a familiarity with being around elderly and kind of seeing the great value they have in that state of their lives, but also then the need for people to get out and see them as well. But obviously as a high school kid, I wasn't thinking, oh, well, this is a great preparation for, the future. It was just, a minimum wage job. But also something that I think the Lord has been able to use, Oh,
I think that's terrific. So now, in addition to ministering at Our Lady of Victory, you also will be teaching at Assumption High School in Davenport.
That's right.
Tell me about that. What's that? What are you looking forward to in your teaching assignment there?
Yeah, well, I mean, it is exciting, and I'm really looking forward to it as an opportunity. I mean, as much as I'll be teaching, I think I'll be doing a heck of a lot of learning this year as well. Not being not at least feeling like I'm a formally trained teacher. But I'm just coming off 6 years of philosophy and theology studies at seminary, and you learn a lot of great stuff, and you get quite deep in some of the stuff as well, and kind of analytical, kind of abstract. And the question always is, as you leave seminary, is like, how do I translate this? How do I put this into words that, your average person can receive and then find applicable to their lives? Yeah. Well, that's really kind of what I'm going to be doing this year at Assumption.
You'll find out, right?
That's right. But I think, so obviously we have our own course material and curriculum that we'll be doing, but I think some kind of more general goals is just like, I think that it's great that Assumption wants to have the presence of a priest at the school. And so I want to be, between all my duties, like as available to the student body, families, and staff and faculty as I can. But it's also just a way in which these students can see a priest as being relatable. That, no matter where they're at in their lives, hopefully they feel like they can search out for a priest and have a conversation with them. And so I think that's kind of target number one for me, is just to let the kids know that, hopefully me being a priest is a thing that they can find some sort of relatability in. And then, from that relationship being formed, then, you can start to delve into the teachings of the church. But first and foremost, who's Jesus Christ for you? So there'll be big questions that have to be answered and frankly, firstly have to be asked. And I think just kind of getting the students to want to ask those big questions. I'll be teaching predominantly seniors. That'll be kind of I think on the cusp of graduation, college, military, whatever they're going off to. I think it's like that the time is right to really kind of be finding out what those big questions are, and then hopefully I can give them some tools for answering those.
That's terrific. How do you envision your role as chaplain at Assumption? What's that look like? What are you?
Yeah, so still something that I'll be learning more about in the weeks to come. But I think it'll certainly involve weekly mass, confessions, adoration. So some of those devotional and liturgical practices I'll be able to be celebrating at the school, in the chapel at the school, as well as all school masses and the like. And then I think also just a ministry of presence at the school, that I'm not just kind of popping in and out to teach my classes for the day, but if there's other things that come up, I can kind of be the point man or the go-to priest, to help. And so I think that's being present around the school, but then also at activities and sports and all that. Because I think what it all gets to again is just the relatability of the priest, but also kind of the visibility of the priest, that like, okay, this is ultimately a Catholic high school. Like, hopefully there is it makes sense that, the priest is around for this stuff. And I think all the chaplains I'm following in the footsteps they've kind of tread that way already. And so I've got big shoes to fill. But
so you'll be at the football games, the soccer games, baseball.
That's the hope.
Got it, right?
Yeah. That's the hope to be present. Yep.
Is there a favorite sport you have or no?
Well, there is certainly something about Friday night football in high school. Growing up, though, baseball was always my favorite sport. So. Oh,
that's great.
Yep.
Okay. So what advice might you give to someone considering a vocation to priesthood or religious life?
Yeah. So, like I kind of mentioned with the listening thing, first and foremost, just kind of giving yourself the space and the time to not only talk to God, but allow Him to talk to you. And so really the first step is just to develop some sort of rhythm of daily prayer. And that's something like anything that can start small and then can grow. But it does take a certain level of commitment, maybe hiding the cell phone from yourself for a few minutes, But then speaking of like the cell phone and the vast amount of resources we have access to, like, for all the ill things that, our phones and media can expose us to, there's also a lot of good stuff as well. And so I think like to search out, if you have questions, just be a searcher for truth, be a searcher for answers to your questions in the faith. And I think like for me, that was a huge help, as I discerned is not being afraid to ask myself questions about the faith. And as you kind of start to peel back the onion, you just kind of want to keep on searching. You want to keep on searching. And I think that's a real beauty of our faith, is as many questions as there are, we are inheritors of a great tradition of answers as well. And so
who do you go to? I mean, who would you recommend, if they're doing social media searches and that sort of thing?
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many, and there's a lot also kind of divided. And
that's true. Right.
So how do you sift through that?
That's right. So, well, I mean, a good way to sift through it is, if someone's not talking about Jesus Christ, they're probably, trying to get into kind of see some battle lines drawn so often these days along political lines. And so you can usually tell just by tone and attitude where people are, what they're trying to push. But I think just to be concrete, a few things. There's a podcast from Father Mike Schmitz, the Bible in a Year. If you've always kind of felt like reading more of the Bible but haven't had the time or find it difficult just to kind of sit down and open it up, it's a great way if you're driving or walking. You can listen to this daily podcast where the Bible is read to you. There's a few other great YouTube channels. I would say Pints with Aquinas with Matt Fradd is a good one. He does some great Q&As with a few different priests and sisters and faithful that are that are trying to ask those big questions of the faith and kind of also seek to find what kind of the distinct natures of our Catholic faith and explain it in an approachable and enjoyable way. And so I would say there's plenty of others, but those are kind of two good places to start. And as you kind of you kind of find your way through related media once you kind of start on one. So so there's a lot of good options.
I also wanted to ask you, do you have a favorite Bible verse or book or song at church, and why? Well,
so 1 Corinthians 13, where St. Paul is kind of speaking of this and in successive verses of how, we only kind of see in a shadow now, but in the future we'll see clearly that God is preparing this great weight of glory for us. And it's kind of this just is always reminding me of the importance of faith, that there is a lot in this world that we don't see clearly yet, but yet God has promised us a great future, a life to come, and ultimately a life that will be lived with him in his glory. And I think it's just always helpful for me to go back to that, no matter what I'm facing, or whether it's a time of joy or a time of desperation, of just having hope in God's promise. So that's one I always go back to. And then favorite prayer, but also Bible verse, would be Mary's Magnificat in the Gospel of Luke.
Great. I love that one. I think that's one of my favorite ones too.
Yep.
Wow, that's terrific. So I just have to ask you, what are your other interests or hobbies? Do you have any? Do you have time for any of that?
I do.
And what is it?
Well, at least I used to have time. I'm hoping to still have time. But I like to work out. So I like to run, bike, swim. So a little triathlon training there. I like to lift weights. So I've always kind of found that whenever I'm active, my mind is working the best. And so I can't tell you how many times I've just kind of worked through a homily idea or something on my bike or something like that. Very much a peripatetic in that sense. Also like to play the guitar up at seminary. Throughout our kind of COVID precautions, we were essentially quarantined in the seminary. And so a few of my buddies and I formed a little bit of a cover band. And so on the weekends we would get together and play and sing. And it was a great time. And so I like to play the guitar a bit too.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Boy, I've just so much enjoyed this conversation.
Well, thank you, Barb.
Do you have any other thoughts or any things you'd like to share as we kind of wrap it up?
Yeah, well, I think to just encourage people wherever they're at in their faith journey of just knowing how much the Lord is trying to pursue them, but to also put in the effort to pursue him a bit too. And I think as we kind of, hopefully God willing, come out of these COVID days and this kind of COVID era, of seeing it as a new opportunity and kind of a new freshness for hopefully vitality in the church of not just seeing, the ways in which God is already acting in you and in the church, but also trying to see new ways in which you can grow in your faith. And I think that's kind of as difficult as a time as it has been and currently is. I think it's also a great time of opportunity in the church, a great time of hope. And it's all dependent on God's grace, but also, it doesn't hurt if we put in a little bit of effort ourselves. So.
Oh, that's great. That's great advice. I really appreciate it. I hope you will come back again. So we
you
can
bet. Yeah, I enjoyed this. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you, Barb.
Okay, so for now, we're done with this edition of Catholic Messenger Conversations, and we look forward to seeing you next time.